Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. Welcome to the first official Philosopher King podcast episode. Of course, if you missed last week, don't stop, don't go away now and watch it. Not yet. Catch it later. But you can catch it at either at the YouTube channel at Jonah Stormrider or phone booth podcast.substack.com. But anyway, so welcome. I'm really excited for you guys to join us here. And I'm even more excited to have a face that is already familiar to many of you, probably, most definitely. Templar, who's joined us on the podcast with the phone booth guys and the live streams time and time again. He's always has a lot of really good things to say, as you saw in the little teaser this morning. I've got a lot of respect for this gentleman, and I am looking forward to sharing our conversation with you guys. And please don't hesitate to jump in to the comments and join us here and there. Without further ado, Templar, welcome, sir.
What's up, dude? Thank you for saying all those nice things, man. You're a good guy, dude. I enjoy talking to you, and I'm excited to do this because I think we're
Uh,
about to have a great time. So,
I appreciate you being willing to be the guinea pig, so to speak, of the first actual full, official Philosopher King podcast. So I appreciate that, man.
hell yeah, sign me up.
There we go. So um, I know we had talked a little bit about a number of different topics earlier when we were kind of riffing about what we wanted to talk about, and I think the first suggestion that we discussed that you threw out there, I think, is really pertinent to what we're seeing in the world right now with the Kirk assassination and the the national response, both the visceral response that a lot of more rational minded persons, whether on the right or the left, I think everyone who has a heart and soul to some degree, I know I'm saying it very strongly, but mourns the death of a prominent figure like that, of a loud voice, of a pronounced voice, regardless of whether or not you agree with him. There were many things that I disagreed with him on, but in general, I think he was a good man and a good father. But what's interesting to me and what's tragic to me is you have this contrasting visceral reaction of rejoice over the death of someone, which is beyond my comprehension of how that can be a human response. But anyways, I think the conversation about groupthink and how that dynamic plays out and how we get sucked into or moved or manipulated, etc. I think it's a good topic to kind of revisit and unfold a little bit. So, what are your
Right on.
thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. Like when we were having this conversation, when we stopped because we were like, hey, this probably be good for this. Um, I think it is suiting because I think that currently our emotions are being utilized against us the same way it occurred 24 years ago during 9/11. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're being trauma bonded, okay? And right now it seems like they're using the divides or they're trying to divide the two camps to then attack each other, right? To be focused on them. Um, and it's interesting that they're using a lot of the same like patterns or methods, to get people all riled up. Just as, like after 9/11, you know, everything was directed towards the Muslims, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that same unleashing. And right now, I think if you substitute Muslim for say leftist, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you get a lot of the same thing. But I think a lot of this is being like played obviously because I suspect a third party, right? I think a lot of other people suspect a third party. But regardless, even if there wasn't a third party, right? I think that people need to recognize that much as the Patriot Act was introduced as a response, you know, um, and as powerful as our emotions can be, that you have to kind of watch in moments like now for all the sneaky stuff that they start to do. And I think you can hear like the rhetoric that they're putting up, right? Like the whole concept of hate speech and whatnot. Like you can already see the group dynamic getting caught in. And there's going to be two responses to that, right? You're going to have the right side, because they're looking at it from a prism of like, yeah, this is for my enemies, right? And
Hmm.
my opponents, they don't realize, hey, this shit's gonna flip back on you too. So they're for it. I don't know. It just
Yeah, that's interesting. And what I find fascinating about this particular dynamic is, on the one hand, you have a lot of more conservative leaning people saying, "Oh, as an unhinged, you know, you know, partner to a transgender, and on the heels of all these other transgender shootings over the last, you know, several months." And then on the other side, so the right is blaming some leftist affiliated person, and then the 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 left, or the centrists, they're also trying to pass it off as like a groyper or a far right extremist, like a National Socialist type of kind of like a Nick Fuentes extremist type of thing, right?
mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how they're floating like simultaneously two extremely different, and both sides are relatively convinced that that's actually what's happened.
Right.
It's
And not
fascinating.
only that, the right is actually starting to embrace that perception, right? Because you get all these videos like, oh, you think Charlie Kurt was the wacko? He was just the moderate, right? Wait till you see all this over here, which is exactly where they want to take the conversation, right? Because they need extremes in order to come in, right? Like
Hmm.
that's just how it works, you know? Like they need to make it hate speech against this issue so then it can change against, perhaps certain third parties, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what's interesting too, okay, so taking a step back, because I know that, like, taking a step back from the Kirk incident in
Hmm.
particular,
Hmm.
like you mentioned 9/11, which I think is a salient example. But then you could also go back and bring in the JFK. Like, I've heard people say
Hmm.
this is the JFK of our generation.
Yeah, it's another trauma bond.
Yeah, and it's interesting because fear and anger. I used to always say fear is the one thing, the one emotion that can get you to overcome free will, right? So if I makes you so afraid, you're like, no, I'm not going to run into that. I'm not going to. I'm not going to run into that forest. But then if you're afraid, you're going to run into that forest, no matter whether or not, right, or whatever, right? So it's interesting because but upon further reflection, I wonder if it's not just fear but also anger is something that, and actually this is kind of interesting. Aristotle says that anger is the most rational seeming emotion, because so it's closest to the intellect, and so it actually, when you're angry, what everything you do seems to have a very logical and rational explanation and purpose and justification, and that oftentimes only once you come down from the anger do you realize, oh boy.
Yeah, I wasn't rational.
Oops. And we've all had that experience. um, so I mean, it's interesting. So it seems like, on the one hand, there's a lot of anger being drummed up right now.
And that's what they want. And I want to specifically point out like the way all of this kind of got unrolled, right? Because first it wasn't even just like Charlie, right? So at first there was the girl on the bus who got stabbed in the neck, right? So you have like this gruesome outrage going on, right? I
Right.
mean, that in itself was already something. And
Yep.
then you took the Charlie situation and you compounded on that, right? So now you have this just like swarm, this flood of emotions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now you just start leading these people around, right? Now the topic is where to direct that. And how do you direct that? You invoke Charlie's name. Oh, Charlie, this. Let's bring this with it. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
everybody just kind of takes their place and gets their roles. Because when it comes to group dynamics, there's social proofing and there's conformity, right? And why do we do that? Is because our brain is wired for shortcuts, right? Like group dynamics show us that it's safe. The group tends to do the safest thing. If I'm with the group, I'm safest. It's not until I stray away from the herd that
Mm-hmm.
there's a problem. It's the gazelle that's fucking laughing on its own that the lion gets. When you're speeding down the road, it's the guy who's not with everybody who gets singled out and gets the ticket, right? Like that's so.
Yeah.
Anyways,
No, that's no. I agree with that. Actually, I think it's a good observation. But it's also interesting, and kind of to tie this back into a lot of what inspired Kirk in his life. Like, yes, there's safety in the herd,
Mm-hmm.
but we also know that like mob rule and mob thought and like group think
Mm-hmm.
isn't ever a good thing. They'll
Right.
go off the edge of a cliff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like lemmings, you know? And so there's this interesting thing of wherever there's a group, yeah, you need to be part of the group, but that group also needs a shepherd,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's interesting because that was he was very I would say he I mean in my experience of what I saw of him, he was very admirable in his respect and the fearlessness, but also like with the gentleness with which he communicated his faith.
Yep.
And he was always proclaiming the faith in our Lord, but it was never like in an argumentative "you're going to hell if you don't believe" type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really beautiful, and so like that kind of begs the question of like, okay, well, group groupthink is bad if the group is the one doing the leading. If
Mm-hmm.
it's being led somewhere by a shepherd, then they're only as safe as the quality of the shepherd.
And I would agree with that.
No, and so
Which, in this case, like even behind the scene, now you see everyone vying to be the next shepherd, right? Like everybody's got
of
their
turning
teeth
point,
into that,
yeah,
right? Um, but even I'm mainly just using the Charlie point because it gives an
yeah,
example of the
yeah,
behaviors and whatnot, right? But so now you have like this new leadership that wants to come up, and they automatically think that like, oh, okay, they can invoke and pull the group behavior around, like that's what it's about, and it's whoever takes that over and whatever message they focus on, that's the thing I'd be, you know worried about in that particular thing, because that's what they're trying to drive the focus to, it's that same dynamic across the board anywhere.
yeah, and it kind of again this leads right into okay, yeah, so this little sliver of society, which is called Turning Point,
Hmm.
right? Which is a fairly big sliver, but in the grand scheme of the US or the world, it's a small sliver.
Right.
So it had a shepherd.
Hmm.
Now the shepherd's been struck, and there's going to be a new shepherd apparently at some point. Obviously, there will be. But then when you look at the group think of the US as just the larger group, the larger herd, who's shepherding that? Do we know who's shepherding that? Is it who, right? I mean, there's a lot of questions there, and it's again, it's only as good as the shepherd. The group is only as safe as the shepherd is good. So when you have mainstream media or whatever other, we've seen a lot of communist influence growing in the past 50 years, for example. But when you have a a a communist system that's rejected the true shepherd, our Lord, then since if the shepherd of our country or the group that's shepherding our country doesn't have their bearings right, if they've rejected God or embraced some other lie, then that's not good for the sheep, right?
Right.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's interesting. Uh, yeah, one other thought I wanted to dig in a little bit because I know that this is I get a lot of especially in the states, right? Everybody talks about like champions for democracy, you know. My I have a pretty unpopular opinion about this. I feel like democracy is arguably one of the worst forms of government
I
because it
agree.
is the sheep leading the shepherd, right?
Yeah.
But I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. What contrasting democracy with kingship, the feudal system of the past, where there was a clear hierarchy and there was a clear leader and there was the divine right of kings, and that king was provided by God. And so everybody would be on their knees praying that God convert and turn the heart of the king toward God, or that the king would, educate his son to be a holy ruler. Like there were holy rulers back in the day. They weren't all tragedies, right? There were some, but so what's interesting is because um, I see the same fundamental error, and I want your feedback on this, but the same. I guess you call it like at its core, democracy says, no, 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 we're not going to trust God to provide a shepherd for our nation, a leader for our nation. We're going to decide what's best for us. It's kind of like the lie of evolution. Oh, we weren't created by a loving creator. We created ourselves out of the primordial soup over millions of years, right? And I think that can be said also for like the Big Bang Theory. We came out of nothing and we made ourselves. This universe formed itself. And I would argue, being a Catholic, and again, I mean, I'm not trying to force that down anybody's throat, but it's just how I see Protestantism as the same error of saying, well, no, I'm not gonna look to a an authority. I'm not going to look to a guidance that God provides, someone to guide me, that God provides me. I'm going to trust my own self in interpreting. We're going to decide, we the people are going to decide how to interpret scripture, or what's true or false about God. What did he reveal or what not? So,
Yeah, it's the creation thinking it's wiser or superior to the creator, right? It's
mm-hmm,
just hubris really when you look at it. And with with democracy, right? It's 50% plus 1. So it
mm-hmm,
doesn't even mean that it's the best idea, right?
right,
Or the thing that's going to be the most beneficial. It's strictly the thing that gathers the most following, right? And through hook or crook. Um, and I think it's an unstable vehicle to like live your life by, right? Because it's just always going to maneuver, right? All you just have to do is move the needle a little bit and say, oh well, maybe abortions aren't that bad. You know what I mean, guys? Yeah,
mm-hmm,
come on, right? And now that kind of moves it out. You don't have a core principle, right? Like religion for people is kind of identified as their core structure where the rest of their beliefs kind of stem from, right? Like kind of a spot where they're rooted. Um, so it's more structured, I guess, is
mm-hmm,
what I'm trying to say,
mm-hmm,
right? When you have, rule by, say, a republic, right? It's representation, but it's still set, like in our Constitution, for example, right? Um, that our rights are given to us through the creator, right? So I mean, it sticks kind of like a, what do they call that? The tree that kind of goes right through the center of the picture or whatever, right? It's
mm-hmm,
Axis Mundi or whatever,
mm-hmm.
but I don't know, a real one, like in life, like a rooting of beliefs. And I don't think you get that with it. I think that's kind of like, remember the other day when we were talking and you were naming all the different things that were kind of like the same as the heliocentric model versus the geocentric model. It's
Yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
it's just kind of like another example of that. It's just kind of like another vehicle on how they misdirect. How it's kind of hard to get across the
mm-hmm,
psychology I want to get
yeah,
to. I'm
yeah.
trying, but if I guess if I can think of a clearer way, I'll kind of circle back to it. But I'm having a hard time articulating
Yeah,
it
well, I guess so.
exactly.
I think evolution is a really good tangible example of that, because if you don't have as your grounding, as like an anchor, the fact that we were created for a purpose by a creator who cares and loves us and designed this world around us, really ultimately for the sake of the incarnation, right? Um, if you're missing that, then it becomes very hard to have a deep sense of meaning in life if you see yourself just as a progression from a lower life form,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and the result of chaos that somehow brought apart order, which, I mean, let's just ignore the laws of thermodynamics, fine, you know? So, but yeah, so I think that's an interesting psychological like a subliminal message that is un that is that affects us in our subconscious if we hold on to that belief and give it any space in our minds as truth. Then it undermines other deeper, more, perhaps you could argue, more important and foundational truths.
Which is how it works, like everything's always, you just got to chip away a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, like uh, the more you hear a lie, even if you know it's a lie, the more comfortable you will become with it, right? The more you see a person, right? Like a neighbor, somebody you may never even talk to them, but you guys
Mm-hmm.
just see each other occasionally and wave or whatever. After a long
Mm-hmm.
enough time, you just naturally feel familiar with them, and you'll start to think of them fondly. You know what I mean? So like it changes. It's not just something it was originally just a hey, that's my neighbor, but eventually you can think of a neighbor you've probably never talked to and think, oh man, I really like that person. Well, why the fuck do you feel that way? Why do you really like that person? Right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But that's how it works. It's a little piece by a little piece by a little piece, a change in the rewiring, and that's how you get to a point where people worship the creator, to a point where they'll do anything to be lost into the creation, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't start on day one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting. And when you do lose that anchoring, and then when you do invert the order,
Hmm.
and when you have the mob leading the way, you kind of walk into a lot of different. But I mean, we know the mob isn't leading. The mob is being
Right.
led,
Like,
right?
which is why they use the vehicle of quote
Yeah.
unquote democracy, even when we're not a democracy,
Yeah.
right? Like,
And
and
it's
you, sorry, go ahead.
no, no. Go ahead.
Oh, like you've read a lot of old philosophy shit, right? So, um, did you ever read like Machiavelli, The Prince?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
A little bit.
like that book is flooded with that, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
all about fucking uh controlling and manipulating the people and fucking each other over so they, you know what I mean, so they could do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that right there is a, I don't know, a good book for anyone who hasn't ever read it. I Whenever I think of the powers that be, like control and them fucking with people throughout the ages, I always think of that book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting, and like being aware of it helps take a step back, right? Obviously, we've all had the same trauma of this, of last week's assassination, right? We've all
Hmm.
had that trauma, but and there's various levels of anger in that reaction,
Hmm.
and so being able to understand the 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 powers at play and being able to take a step back and be like, okay, because like my emotional reaction was, oh man, I can't go live tonight for the pilot episode, right? I was like, I can't. But I'm like, well, the proper response to someone who was having a positive influence in this world, who was using his voice, the proper response for 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 of us to stand up and start using our voice or to continue using our voice, you know, and like, but it's important in order to be able to continue to have that positive impact in the world in the around on the people within our sphere of influence, and make the world a better place in our small little way that we can. We have to first be able to step out of the groupthink and
Right,
realize that it's taking us in a direction that we
right.
don't want to go. That's not good
Somebody is
for our.
shaking the ants.
Yeah.
So you got to recognize that. Hey, we're being shook. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe all this talk about hyperbolic shit like civil war and all that has a, like a nefarious reason behind it. And maybe if I take a step back and look at it and realize what's going on, it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't need to go there.
Yeah. I personally don't think there'll ever be a civil war like that here. I mean, if
No, no,
because
and I don't think it'll be guns and stuff, right? But
mhm,
it doesn't have to be for, society to break down, right? Like we're already at
right.
like an obnoxious point in politics, right? Like we're at a point where politicians can't even find middle ground anymore. Everything
Mhm,
is my team versus your team. Nobody gives a shit about the common person. Nobody even cares to really pretend that they care about the common person anymore. And that's where the real problem was, because at least before, when they pretended that they cared, people like got something out of it. Now they don't even pretend. They give away your money. All this negative shit happens, and there's like no recourse, right? It just feels like a constant,
mhm.
like dump. And I think that's a way that they break your will, your
Yeah.
resolve, because after a certain point, if you lose hope, then the rest is easy.
Well, it's interesting too. I want to say it was like the phone booth podcast, like episode 103 or 104. It was that older gentleman named Dennis. I think I want to say his name was. My he had that big white beard.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. He didn't
yeah,
do the after party.
right. But so one of the things that he said that's really struck me is I think it was Ted who asked him. Um, if you haven't seen that episode or yet, go check it out at phoneboothpodcast.substack.com. Anyways, had to get a plug in there for the boys. But but Ted asked him at one point, I think 2/3 of the way through that podcast, he said, now, because I think he's late 70s, early 80s, something like that. Like he's a lot older than we are. Um, but they said, well, so you've seen the whole decline of our country from the infancy stages to now. When do you think it really took a turn? And without hesitation, he said Roe v. Wade. I thought that was really interesting because he said at that point, then the sexual revolution went into full force because now all of a sudden, any consequences of any promiscuity or moral decadence or, just liberalism in the truest sense of the word, right? Just
Hmm.
unharnessed, arbitrary exercise of choice, right? That's when the moral fabric really started to decay and people
Hmm.
no longer started to take accountability for their actions. And then now all of a sudden, I mean, you could argue it's human sacrifice, you could argue it's whatever, right? There's a lot of spiritual angles that you could take to address or discuss the topic, but regardless, it opened floodgates of sexual immorality, of immorality in the home, broken, like all kinds of stuff that it was interesting that was the moment without hesitation that he pegged
They found
as the moment when the unraveling of the moral fabric of our country started. Very interesting.
it is. And I think every generation has that too, because you get to clock it from where you start paying attention on, you know what I mean? Um,
Yeah. And I mean, I think probably, correct me if I'm wrong, but you and I would probably peg the beginning of the decline from our perspective at about 9/11, when things went from kids playing on the street, nobody being afraid, the neighborhoods were safe, everything was like, I remember growing up, a bell being rung and, I was on the other side of the neighborhood and I would come running home. Like now it's just
yeah,
wild. Like it's a
yeah.
totally different world.
It's everything's about security and safety now, and it's much more of kind of like a militaristic police kind of state. Um, yeah, and I would agree. 9/11 for the most part would be the main thing that I'd be like, yeah, that's kind of where
Mm-hmm.
shit kind of got to where it is today.
It's
Stuff
kind of
just like,
interesting. Just I know a little bit about my story, but what's interesting to me is I remember very distinctly. Everyone has their 9/11 memory, but sitting on the living room floor watching the TV with my brother. He's 4 years younger than me. Watching the towers fall, and we just like looked at each other with like this realization, like there's real evil in this world. He went to fight it in the physical and went joined the military and was deployed over in Afghanistan and everything, and I went to go fight it in the spiritual. So it's kind of cool how like the two brothers set out to on their own paths with the same heart of fighting for truth and goodness, and so it's kind of a cool defining moment for both of us, I think.
right on.
So
No, that is cool.
what was your 9/11 memory?
So 9/11 is my friend Michelle's birthday, first and foremost. So usually on that day, all of us friends would get together and celebrate. But that morning, I got woken up by a friend of mine. And he's like, "Dude, did you see?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Dude, a plane hit the World Trade Center." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, get up. It's on TV." So I got up, and that's how I started my day. So yeah.
Mm, yeah, yeah, that's pretty wild. So I know we talk about like what can we do to make the world a better place? What can we do to help steer and turn this country? and to rebuild Western civilization, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's a restoration of the moral fabric, restoration of the arts, of the pursuit of truth, of all these things, which are all noble and important, right? But at the same time, in the back of our heads, especially as Christians, right, there's this recognition that while what we're doing is necessary for the salvation of our souls and for the salvation of the souls around us, to have that good influence like Kirk did, right? Calmly and lovingly witnessing to this to Christ, right? Um, at the same time, in the back of our heads, we know that we're headed toward the book of Revelation. And whether that's 10 years from now, 5 years from now, or if it's already started, or if it's not for another 100 years or 1,000, like we don't know, right? But it's definitely, you definitely get the sense, especially as cryptocurrencies, Palantir, AI surveillance, like all these ever more controlling tentacles start to reach in and restrict, especially around the financial sector, right?
Yep.
But everything, it starts to ring off alarm bells like, are we closer than we think?
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And and I think uh, events like that recently occurred are conduits into that, right? Because it makes people harden their hearts, right, through anger and whatnot, and see each
Mm-hmm.
other as the enemy. And the Bible says, and in the end days, like good will be bad and bad will be good, and people's hearts will be hardened. And like it, when I was younger, it was hard to imagine necessarily how we would get to that point. But like being here in life where we are now, it's like, oh, we got like really far really fucking fast, right? Like people have seemed to have lost a lot of the social connection, right? And I think a lot of that happened because of online. I think we stopped interacting with people in real life and realizing the the beauty in just people, and then we got online and we just started seeing all the worst in humanity
Mm-hmm.
and getting brown beaten by that and programming ourselves that way. And that's kind of what we just started noticing. And as we left our interactions with people and our face-to-face communications, or even our phone conversations where we at least saw, heard their voice, and moved into texting or whatever, we've become more disassociative, right? And these are our brothers, really, when it comes down to it, right? We're all related when it comes to the creator,
Mm-hmm.
but we've put each other at bay, far enough at bay that we've hardened our hearts to the point where people are realistically thinking of just engaging in combat or whatever with each other. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like the value of life is is just gone. Like you said, even with abortion. Like how can we not be on that doorstep? You know?
Or even just like the story that you share or that you referenced earlier, that I think is still fresh in everyone's minds, that young lady on the bus that was just senselessly, her life was taken without a motive or a purpose or anything, right? So you see that total disregard for human life. But yeah, and it's interesting too because there was something else I wanted to say too right before that. You were saying about, oh, the impersonality, like through being coming online, how it's become impersonal.
Mm.
So I have a very, as you know, I have a unique perspective on that because I went into the monastery when AOL Instant Messenger was the, like, that was all the rave. Everyone was doing AOL Instant Messenger, right? And like we had just gotten to the point where we could text on our like Nokia phones, where you had to hit the number at the same time,
Yep.
and it just got to the point where there was predictive texting, so you hit like three 2 times and then five 4 times, and then it would figure out the rest of the word for you, right? It was so
Yep.
great, right? And so I went into the monastery, had poverty, chastity, obedience, silence, all that stuff for 6 years. I came out, and I remember I went with my mom to go see, it was like a lunch or whatever, and she was seeing an old friend she hadn't seen in a few months or whatever. And I remember her saying, "Oh, I can't wait to tell you about my trip to Italy or whatever it was." Right? I don't remember what the trip was, but it was a trip she was excited to share. And the friend's response was, "Oh yeah, I saw all your pictures on Facebook. So exciting." And I saw the deflation in my mom's face. Like she was excited to share this moment and talk her through and describe the scenery and the feelings and everything, completely deflated. And I just remember thinking, how sad. Like be, that crept up on a lot of people. I had that really great blessing of just being able to see the jump, right?
Right.
So it like gives this social media gives this illusion of connection while actually weakening it, if not completely
Yes.
destroying it, right?
Yeah,
It's wild.
absolutely. It is wild, and that's a great story, dude. That's a great observation.
And what's really cool though is at the same time technology is also a beautiful tool. I mean, like, I don't even know where in the country you live, sir, right? And yet you and I have had some great conversations along with the guys at the phone booth, right?
Right.
Like, there's just some really awesome, thought provoking, heartfelt conversations that we've had that can even be life changing in some ways because it makes us reflect on how we are and everything. So it's kind of neat to see how, at the same time, while there is this travesty of the effect of technology and social media and all this other stuff, I think it's, again, it's important to step back, get balance, and realize, okay, this is also a powerful tool.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like it's kind of like with the good comes the chains. You know what I mean? Like, hey, this got
Hmm.
some good qualities to it. However, some restrictions may apply, terms and conditions. Like,
That's
you know,
right. That's right. Vince would be like dualistic right now.
love you,
So
Vince.
yeah, but no, it's so true. Yeah, check out Dualistic Podcast at
Yeah,
phoneboothpodcast.substack.com.
Vince is awesome, man. I love
Yeah.
Vince.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I think I might have shared this with you before, but another like shocker for me, just to give you an idea of the time frame that I was in there. I came out and was talking to a buddy of mine, and I asked him something, and he was like, "Just look it up on YouTube." I was like, "What's YouTube?" Right? So this was in like what, 2010, 2012, something like that. So it's kind of funny. So
Well, in that time, even when you think about that, right? Like that was also the time where it was about keeping the push to keep the internet free,
hmm
right? It was all going on during there. And, 20 years later, 24 years later, here we are. And, we're the furthest thing from it, online at least,
hmm
Um, and they've gotten everything that they needed out of it. you know they got everybody connected, they got everybody committed to the system. Back in the day, if tragedy were to occur in your community or whatever, communities had the ability to kind of pull together and get the lesser fortunate amongst them, through things, right? But the way we're structured these days, with how we just went all in retardedly on technology, when
hmm
the lights go out, like very few people have the property to farm or the capability or the know-how or the resources, not to mention all the people that they're stacked upon, like you already bought in, like you're, like that's your zone, that's where you're at on the board, on the,
hmm
so be aware of that. But anyways, um but that's it. It's all about the trap, right? It gets you in there, and the more you're invested into something, you just you keep going, and I think that relates again to the whole end time concept, because you got to get lost, really lost, um, to be at that point, right? Like the world's broken. The way Revelation describes the world, even when it gets down to, the two prophets, right? Like when they die, it's almost kind of like everything that happened with Charlie Kirk with fucking the yelling. Not saying Charlie Kirk is the prophet by any means. I'm not
Right, right,
saying that.
right,
I'm using it as an example, right?
right.
But all the celebration and adulation and just like, oh, like yay, this is something good, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's the exact same concept that occurs, and with the prophets. And
I
again, I'm
hadn't
not
made
saying
that.
that thing, but
I hadn't made that connection that that's actually the same spirit that is talked about when the two witnesses who battle the Antichrist and the beast system when they are slain.
yeah. And for three
That
days after they're dead, and everyone thinks they're dead, people are fucking celebrating and giving gifts, and like
hmm
yes,
Well, and it's interesting too. I always thought that one sign that we're getting closer to those days is now, for the first time in the history of the world, allegedly. I know we could get into reset theory and all that other stuff, but we'll leave that off on the
right, right,
side for the moment.
yeah.
Um, but like, this is the first time in history since biblical times when those words were written that all the world could look on as their bodies lie there
Mhm.
because of live streaming, because of videos being posted all over, right? I mean, how many people are watching and sharing in this conversation and following this conversation across the country, right? So it's like this is the first time in history that the whole world literally could look on.
And look at all the turmoil, right? So obviously there's the wars and rumors of war, and the flooding and everything, but like we're in a position where you have like global restructuring, right? Like you got the BRICS alliances going on, and you got us trying to hold on to our control, right? So you have the ability right now, and you have a lot of the signs for a great leader to come and be like, "Oh, I got this, guys. I got this. Just gonna cost you your soul. Don't worry, I got you."
Yeah. Well, what's interesting? Have you ever heard of Probably Alexandra?
I
She's a
don't think
YouTube
so.
personality. She has a YouTube and a podcast and a blog and stuff, but it's Probably Alexandra.
Okay.
She's this sweet little Christian girl, very soft spoken, but she's so prayerful and like God filled. It's really cool. But her whole philosophy or her whole theory, and she just kind of riffs on scripture and shares her heart all the time. It's all very well thought out. But she talks about that the beast of the sea and the beast of the land
Hmm.
are the two beasts that actually war with each other. So you have this dark
The
beast of the sea.
Yeah, the Canaanites, right? Like the sea peoples who came through, right? Like we know where
Well,
that shit's at.
right. And
Sorry.
what's
Anyway.
interesting, no, you're good. And what's interesting is like the sea represents maritime law. That's the whole like current legal system, right? And then
Yep.
you have the common law, the law of the land,
Right.
and the white beast. So the white beast is actually, and we're told that the devil would come disguised as an angel of light, right? So
Right. The false prophet.
it comes to liberate the mankind from the dark world order and installs a false light world order, right? And so that would be if one wanted to make an argument for, obviously there were a lot of people saying, "Oh, Obama's the Antichrist," all this other stuff for a long time, right? Clearly not at this point,
No, Trump could,
right?
and he's got the spurs on his feet.
But if the world order of the dark banking system and everything else like that were forced out by a light world order, a light knight like Trump, for example, championing common law, nationalism as opposed to communism, right? Um, it starts to become a little bit more. That's an interesting thing to be aware
Parallel.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And whether this is the big final play out of that dynamic, it's certainly a microcosm of that dynamic.
Well, okay. Let's take it to the next spot, right? So in those times, the world begins to turn against Israel, right? Well, it's not biblical Israel, originally, but the way things are said and where it is and
hmm
how we've gotten here, well, like the world appears to be turning against Israel, and that's very, prophetic. Like,
It's interesting. Yeah.
so
Well, and
there's a
also
lot
what's
there.
and also like the biggest objection, and again, I still hold out a sliver of hope that Trump is a good thing. I have this concern as a baseline that that he's not, that he is a false light,
Mm.
especially as these AI protocols keep getting pushed and the digital currency system keeps getting pushed by his administration. But all that aside, for the moment, if you look at the biggest objection that I get when I present that thought bubble for people to consider is, well, no, the whole world, that said that the whole world would love the Antichrist, but everybody hates Trump. Well, wait a second. First of all, we have to remember that the powers that be have run Hollywood for a very long time. They know how to show a hero's journey. They know how to show the hated, scrappy guy who everybody he's picked on. Nobody likes him. He's all, and then he has this growth period where he, almost loses his life. Oh, like in Butler, Pennsylvania, for example, perhaps, right? And then he's fighting against all odds, and his redemption story, right?
Yep.
So like we know that they have these story arcs and they're very good at getting our emotions into these stories. So
Right, and we're
who's to
already
say that
trained by the archetypes of the story, so
who's to say that that's not what's happening already? Like you see like rallies in different parts of the world pro Trump, and anti Trump, of course. Yeah, they've got that dualistic dichotomy going.
dualistic.
Right, exactly. um but so it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I think Trump is interesting because he does fit a lot of that, right? Like a lot of it. And I used to think, oh man, was it him specifically? And I thought Joe Biden was the man of lawlessness, and that Trump was the Antichrist. Then as watch, I'm like, man, you start looking in the background and you see that, like that beast system that's going to be required to buy and sell, right? You got to take the
Hmm.
mark on the hand or the forehead, right? So if you flesh that out as, say, maybe AI with a electromagnetic tattoo or whatever the fuck they call those
Hmm.
things, magnetic tattoos or
Hmm.
whatever, and you connect that with like Bill Gates or Microsoft's funky little crypto patent 666.
Hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's easy to see how you get there, how it's utilized. And well, then if you look at the cast of characters, it's like, you see Peter Thiel, a guy who's like very prominent about the Antichrist, right? And that network, and who's he bringing up? The guy right behind Trump. Just saying.
So it's interesting you say that, actually,
Just
because I think
saying.
you're right. I think there's a common misunderstanding just because of all the drama and all of the um, it's not like the infamism of the Antichrist, right?
Hmm.
It's it's not the Antichrist himself who implements the mark and the beast system. It's the prophet to the Antichrist who comes afterwards who
After him.
causes all to worship the Antichrist.
Right.
So if I'm not saying that JD is the
I'm
false
just
prophet
saying,
who's going to make
dude,
everybody,
the
but I'm
guy
like,
has
I'm
no
not saying it's
political
not.
history. The guy changed his name 3 times, right? Has no political history. They line him up to run into the Senate, right? Just like they did with Barack Obama. All of
Hmm.
a sudden, as soon as he jumps in, they're all like, yeah, this needs to be the guy that goes with Trump. So he hasn't even done anything politically. They put him in. So now, through connection, through association of Trump, right? He gets this praise and esteem, and he hasn't done anything, and people are they don't know anything, So when he's able to just drop his nuts on the table, is like when we'll kind of see that guy, you know.
Hmm.
But I think people should be aware of that, Like I see a lot of people rooting for a guy or like overly positive about a guy that they know very little about, and that's
Yeah.
that's factual. That's not, conspiratorial. That's just like that's how he got there. He jumped and then immediately he's in this campaign. And
I
where
mean,
who was his guy? Mr. Antichrist lover Peter Thiel, who fucking wants to run and has the contract for fucking AI with Palantir, who Doge goes in and connects everything. But anyway, sorry, that's
no,
way
no, you're
outside of the leap, I guess. But anyways, so that I guess I'm painting that picture to show you that it is plausibly on the table. Not that it is, but it's plausible. Like
right.
if you wanted to see how this could work, that is how it could work right before your eyes, right? And a lot of it fits exactly, in line, like biblically, the times and whatnot. And interestingly enough, we got the Feast of Trumpets, right? Which again is in that sequence, bro.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and it's really interesting because you know we are told of the things that would come before the end, and the great apostasy was one. Our Lord mentioned several things. The great apostasy was one of those things that had to come before the end. The complete falling away, like the number of priests and religious and Catholics who left the church, or even just the whole, a lot of the church itself since Vatican II has abandoned the teachings that it had for 2,000 years, right? Like a lot of the core truths and beliefs, it's literally departed from. And I mean, if that's not a great apostasy, I don't know what would be a better example of a great apostasy. And even like a lot of um like just the level, the moral integrity or the moral standards of a lot of Christians today, even there's a lot of acceptance of whether it's homosexuality or birth control or abortion, with like there's a lot of things that have been historically considered unthinkable are now just passe,
Hmm.
right? And so it's the things are all the boxes are being checked. I mean, that being said,
And people's
I,
discernment are shit, right? And it doesn't even have to be, because it says even the elect will be deceived, right? So like what's coming isn't just for the idiots.
and that's the thing that, like, St. Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, right? Like, yes, we have to have faith in what's been revealed, and yes, we believe what we believe, and that we've been redeemed and salvation's been offered. And yes, we believe, okay, yeah. But if our Lord himself said that the time of the would be cut short because otherwise the elect themselves would be deceived, this deception is going to be fantastically deceiving. I was looking for another word, but
Yeah,
you know,
because
it's a
people are
deceiving
gonna,
deception.
yeah, people are gonna see the false prophet, and people are gonna see the beast, and they're just gonna go all in. And that's the thing. You can't accept that mark at all. Period. That's damnation. So you can't do that ever. Period. That's the second chance. Don't touch that.
Well, and I think there's a common misconception though, and this is where I feel like really needs to be understood or at least reflected on, is a lot of folks, a lot of Christian, a lot of believers believe that the mark will also be like an explicit denial of their faith. No, a lot of people will receive the mark because without it, they won't be able to buy and sell. That's what we're told. It has
Right.
nothing to do explicitly directly with the religion. Just
Right.
like
Your
when,
renunciation, although they'll take your head off for it, but that's different.
well, and so then you see a lot of the people, again, since we're on YouTube, the jab, right? Or the
Right.
jabberoonie or whatever you want to call it, right? A lot of people took that so they could go on vacation, or
Right.
took that because they wanted to be able to go out to eat. Like, and that's going to be what's required, is us to want to maintain a certain quality of life or perceived freedom by subjecting ourselves to something like that. And I think it's important to remember that it won't be an explicit, just like Eve in the garden wasn't told, oh, here, disobey God, eat this apple.
Right.
Actually, there's a really interesting nuance to that story too. So not only did she eat the apple, so here's a question for you. I love this.
Okay.
So if Eve ate the apple first,
Hmm.
led Adam to eat it, then why is the original sin called the sin of Adam? Why is he the one who is responsible for the fall of all humanity?
Okay. I'll take a stab at this. Okay. First off, I would say it would be because one, Adam exerted his free will in eating of the apple with Eve. So even though she presented it, like he had the choice to bite it. But two, um, he Eve was his mate, his helper. So it was upon him to be the leader. So between those two things, I would say that would be why
Mm-hmm.
it would be Adam on the original
He
sin.
was supposed to be a philosopher king, bro.
Yeah.
No, so what's interesting is Eve, if you go back and read the story again, Adam was told by God, eat of anything in this garden except for that tree. Okay. Oh, now
Oh,
you
but
need a
Eve,
helpmate. I'm giving you Eve.
right,
Okay. So Eve was disobedient not to God, but to Adam, who she had to trust.
right.
Adam was the one who then turned and disobeyed God, which is why, actually, in the curse afterwards, when God cursed the serpent and then Eve and then Adam, the curse for Eve was that your desire would be for your husband. Now that's how they translate it in English, but the actual original was, which we had, the most authoritative text we have are the Greek, but that's neither here nor there. But so in the original text, it said your desire will be to reign over your husband. So essentially, the disorder that she put in the relationship, which was not trusting his leadership, she decided to go against his leadership. That would be the curse, with that she would always want to do so. And look at now, we have
That
feminism.
masculine femininity, yeah, that
Feminism
Ishar
is
spirit,
constantly trying to overthrow that order that God put in creation for a reason.
the moon
Now,
worshippers.
the new Adam, our Lord, did what Adam was the first Adam was supposed to have done by laying down his life for the people that were in his care. And that's like, I think it's really important, especially because philosopher king can be misunderstood. It's not, the king is not a king for his own sake. He's supposed to lay down his life and serve the people in his care. So it's not a thing of glory. It's a thing of responsibility and onus. What does that word come from? Ownership. Like, you have to own. It's heavy
And
to
we've
have
lost
that.
that with our leaders, by the
Yeah.
way, like completely. Because, yeah. Anyway, sorry, I just
My
wanted to
hope
point that
is,
out.
though, that, see, again, I know we were talking about earlier the possibility of Trump being the Antichrist, but I really do see him as a leader who understands the onus of leadership. Like, I see him carrying the presidency in a heavy manner. Like,
Hmm.
he understands the weight of his obligation.
Hmm. And
Now,
he respects the office. I think he genuinely respects the
yeah,
office.
yeah, and rumors have come out from the White House, allegedly, that he talks about heaven all the time, and he talks about whether or not he's going to make it, whether or not he whether or not he's done enough good in his life to be received into heaven.
Right, I
If
heard
that's
that
true,
story.
I can't wait. I have never hoped to be more wrong in my life. I've never more hoped to be wrong in my entire life than my suspicions and concerns about Trump. Because if he is what he's saying, and he's gonna, like, stave off the years of the tribulations and all that other stuff for a while, and kind of bring our country back to its glory, so to speak. I mean, that would be amazing.
It would be amazing, you know? But when you look at reality, those things aren't shaken out, like, you know, if you're
Yeah.
realistic on where things are, and it's not anything necessarily bad that he's doing, right? It's just the way the world is shaping up, and I think it's going to lead that way because it was, it was
Yeah.
like, 2000 plus years ago. But I
Hmm.
want to raise a question. So
Yeah.
when you were on Adam and Eve, did you read the first and second book of Adam and Eve? I think that's what it was called, the first and second book. It's from the Ethiopian Bible.
I haven't.
It's
No.
like the same spot where they get like the Book of Enoch and that.
Okay.
So that book takes place, and it's all about like right after getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, right? And it's
Hmm.
it's Adam and Eve's life. And I don't dude, you got to read it, dude. It's so cool. Did you ever see the movie Groundhog's Day?
Yeah.
They got the premise of Groundhog's Day off of that book because,
Really.
yeah, so the devil, he keeps coming in all these different like shapes and sizes, and fucking like he's killing Adam jumps off a cliff. I mean, Adam like gets scared of darkness, and just like every time you turn around he just gets scared of something new and just like falls over and dies. And God's got to be like, there, dude. It's really interesting. But anyways, it
Interesting.
it also talks and touches into a lot of questions that people tend to have, about like original sin and what it meant and what really changed, when uh, Adam bit from the apple, and how they kind of lost that real connection with the garden and what that meant. And for them to, again, you know, uh, to have hunger for the first time, right? Like the first time Adam got hungry, he freaked the fuck out, got scared, and just dropped and died, right? Like he was just like, oh,
Mm.
and God's like, here, Adam, this is what you do. The first time he saw darkness, he just froze up and died, like, and the whole thing is, about that. And then
See,
obviously the devil
it's
coming through.
it's interesting because I think the reason why that was left out of the canon originally, because going back to like working out your salvation with fear and trembling, and the idea of like reverence for the for our deceivability, for lack of a better word. That's part of the reason why I haven't gone into those apocryphal secondary texts very much, um, because I've dabbled a little bit in reading a little bit of the Book of Enoch, but some of that other stuff I haven't. And part of that is, so for example, in that idea of Adam kind of not being able to handle normal everyday things, so that the theological understanding is he gave him, because names are important. Names signify the natures of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when God had Adam name all of creation, it was because he had given Adam a complete understanding of the natures of all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was naming with understanding perfectly all of creation, which is why also he named Eve how he did, right? And so it's just interesting that that kind of goes against that story, although maybe there's a teaching value that they were going for, kind of like a pedagogical thing. But I think to me that contradicts in a way that sense of God providing Adam with from day one with everything he needed to be successful and to be happy and right.
What it really goes on is more so on what it was like to living in perfection of garden of
Mm.
Eve, right? And that you only knew, perfection, and you were never sad, and like it
Oh,
was
I
it was
see.
that. So to now have that stripped from you, right? Like that was mainly the
Oh,
real
like the
punishment.
contrast of the exile.
Yeah, because now it's
Okay.
like now you got to come to terms with what this means. You didn't just get sent out of the garden. Like now there's this whole new world that was foreign to you. Like you didn't know what pain was before, but you know now. That
Now
was
there's
never a
death too.
concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so
Yeah.
it's
Interesting.
taking in those experiences, and it kind
Interesting.
of takes even Adam through that. But anyways,
Interesting.
it's an
Yeah.
entertaining book.
Huh.
You know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Fun fact side note, you mentioned Groundhog Day. For a year, I lived in the town that was based in and filmed in. And it was filmed in Woodstock, Illinois. And that they every year they still have that Ground Day ceremony with Punxsutawney Phil that comes out and sees his shadow or not. And it's just that like the whole town just loves it. And it's pretty cool. So little piece of
Right.
rural history.
So here's my connection to that movie when they're on the highway and everything closes down. They get they're on the
Mm-hmm.
freeway. Uh, that right there is Waukegan, and that's the Amsteds, and you can see the old New Sun building there. And
Oh
I
wow.
drive that pretty much, every day. That building and some of that shit's not there, but that's it's also where they did like Batman. But anyways, so yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
that's fun. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see, moving forward. I think, like you were saying before, it's really important to have, you know, I mean, that's the like it discernment, right? Like as things continue to pop off or to show themselves, to take a step back from that group think, to take a step back from the emotion of, because if Trump is going to be that hero who's born, or the hero who's made, not born, rather, through toil and through heroism and withstanding all these slings of the enemy, and he rises to save not only the U.S. but the world from the clutches of this dark beast. Like there's going to be elation worldwide. There's going to be all this emotion, not just it's going to be a lot harder, I think, to step back from as contrasted to like the Kirk thing or 9/11, because that's a negative emotion that you can be like, okay, let me take a step back. I'm okay. My family's okay. Like, let me put my thinking cap on and see what's going on. When like all of a sudden blessing upon material blessing
Right, right.
upon
Yeah,
blessing
it's pleasure,
and
pleasant.
elation and everything seems to be wonderful, that's going to be, I think, a more challenging even to take a step back and be like, okay, is this a godly joy and peace, or is something
Right.
else looming?
That's a really good point. Because that would be an easy way to get lured in, right? Because it feels good. Oh man, this is great. Oh yeah. So you're not even kicking and screaming. You're just kind of running right in with it. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, and then our Lord is the Prince of Peace, and if this the Antichrist or the false king or whatever is comes as and establishes peace, it's going to be like, oh, cool, he's Christ's instrument.
So, so there's what? There's 3.5 years of peace, right? And then there's 3.5 years of turmoil, and it's right there in the midpoint is where he suffers a head wound, right? And the beast takes possession, and that's when all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's in the midpoint itself when he suffers the head wound, but at some point he suffers the head wound. But it's at the midpoint that that the man of lawlessness is revealed,
Yeah,
right?
and that's at the head wound. That's in the third and a half year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Like I'm positive.
Yeah.
But
Well, no,
anyways,
that's yeah.
and that's when the beast basically takes full possession, and from that point, that's when it's all like biblical. That's where he deems himself God, and he draws fire from the sky, and he shows his miracles, you know and
Mm-hmm.
everybody at that point has to submit, or off with your head. You take the mark or you're done. That's it. But if you take the mark, that's your salvation. But at the same point, that's when the battle of Armageddon, happens, right? And it says that, like Jesus wins, right? Like every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, like that's how the story breaks down. So it's kind of scary getting there, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh man, there's some turmoil, but there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. So even if we end up in that scenario, it's like, okay, yeah, it's called tribulation. It's going to be bumpy, but look what's on the other side. You're good. Just don't panic.
It's funny. We one of my old professors in seminary used to joke. He used to say, "We're all the same. All of us humans are sitting in the same exam. We're sitting there taking the same test. Christians, we just have the answers in the back of the book." Right? So like there is a level of peace that comes with knowing that no matter how bad things get, the incarnate word came, gave of himself, and redeemed us. And
Yeah.
so regardless of how bad things seem, we do know that the King of Kings is returning, and like you said, every knee will bend. So it's just, will he find me worthy? Will I hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant? You know, like that's the thing that I think weighs, and I think it should weigh on all of our hearts, that we're the best men that we can be. So I don't know. It's like there's that joy and that trepidation at the same time, the hope and the fear and trembling that comes with being honest with ourselves about our own human frailty. And
And that's what makes it all the more important in like times like this and situations like this, that we don't let our hearts get hardened, right? So like
yeah,
that we can be aware, so that we're not manipulated, that we're not pulled and ruled by our emotions. It's
Yeah,
good.
and I think one of the greatest things in my experience again is having conversations like this with other hearts and souls and other men who have hearts that are open and discerning and malleable and not hardened, but looking to the Father for guidance in our lives and looking to be the best men we can be. Like building each other up and encouraging each other in this journey is so foundational to help our hearts remember to step back and not be hardened, especially when you see people dancing in the streets over the death of a father of two little children. Like it's that's a challenge to not have your heart be hardened, you know?
Yeah,
So I love it, man.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, man, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm absolutely 100% looking forward to having you on the stream again at some point.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how coherent I am, but it makes sense to me.
Well, you made sense over on this end, so we'll have to see in the comments how people feel.
Right on. Yeah, that's
So,
right.
no, but yeah, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah,
Um,
no, thanks for having me on.
any other last thoughts or words that you want to throw into the mix, or that you feel?
Yeah. Um when it comes to just kind of like discernment and group dynamics, um if you see the group and everybody so quick to go one way, that should automatically give you pause to stop and say, wait a minute, why is everyone doing that? You know,
Mm,
like, are they doing it for a valid reason, or are they just doing it because it's trendy thing or they're told to? Like that should be the first rule. Whenever you see somebody doing, like everybody, the group, the collective, doing something, focused on something, whatever, that should be the immediate cue of, wait a minute, like what's
mm.
what what's going on? What should I be looking at here? That's my number one rule of thumb for discernment. If everyone's involved in it, stop for a second.
I love that, and like to connect it back to something we said earlier. Who who's their shepherd? Every flock has a shepherd. So if you see people moving in a flock, who's their shepherd? One of the most chilling things when I started to, because I was huge QAnon follower, Trump supporter at the beginning, right? One of the most chilling and like scales falling from my eyes moment, potentially, if correct, right, was there was oftentimes Q would say, "Sheep no more, sheep no more," basically saying, "Don't be sheeple, like wake up and realize what's going on," right? But the other meaning of that could very well be, if the theory we discussed as a possibility is correct, our Lord says that my sheep know my voice and they follow me. Sheep no more. Is that implying that they're substituting our shepherd for somebody else, and we're not sheep under the shepherd, under the guide of the incarnate Word anymore? Is that is that, are we no longer sheep of the true pastor if we get swept away in this glorification of these white hats that are saving us? Is it a substitution for the King of Kings? Sheep no more was really chilling when thought of in that lens. Now maybe that's not what it means, but to tie back to what you just said, when you see people moving in a mob, who's their shepherd? Who's my shepherd? We know who our shepherd is, right? Who's their shepherd? So I love it.
I don't know.
So
Yeah.
I would just, and all of you guys watching, I would just ask you as we wrap up the stream here. It's been a great Templar. Thank you again. We'll do this again if you're open to it.
Yeah, thanks for having
um,
me on.
but so, lastly, don't forget to check out this episode, future episodes, past episodes at phoneboothpodcast at .substack.com. Also, ask yourself, who's your shepherd? Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.